Are you wearing like a rouge or something?
No, man. I'm talking about VS17 panels today. Hey guys, welcome to Gear Tasting. First off, I wanted to start talking about some of the natural disasters that have happened around the world. I know we haven't really talked about what we're doing personally in ITS, and we always try to do something for those in need and use our resources here at ITS to do good and raise funds for things like that. So a big thing that I've always tried to do at ITS is not take pre-orders on items. I know I've gone over that before, kind of just company values and things like that. So we wanted to produce something that we could raise funds for all those in need with from all these recent natural disasters that have happened from Houston, from Texas area, from Florida to Puerto Rico and surrounding islands. There's just so much going on right now that we wanted to make sure that we picked a group to donate to that's doing something for everybody, and that's tough to do. And when we first started creating this patch and got it into production, which this is our Texas Will Prevail patch, this is what we're going to use to raise funds. And what we're doing is raising funds for Team Rubicon. So even though this is a Texas-based patch design, we're a Texas-based company, but at the same time, the first disaster that hit that was a big deal this season has been the Houston flooding and everything that's gone on in those surrounding areas in Texas. But then, the hurricane came into Florida. While this patch was being produced, it impacted Puerto Rico and everything and those surrounding islands. So this has really turned into, hey, we got to do something for everybody. And the organization that we found, and one that's really close to my heart, is Team Rubicon. So they're a veteran-based organization, which means they are veteran-based volunteers that work with local first responders, emergency personnel, and also technology assets in those areas to help them out. So we felt that was the best way to donate to something like that will help everybody. So they're kind of an impact assistance group. So they travel the world, both domestically and internationally, was kind of what the world means. But so they provide impact assistance anywhere that's necessary. So right now, I just read yesterday that they have a kind of an advanced team in San Juan, Puerto Rico that just landed. They're trying to identify where they can best be used as assets on the ground before they bring in kind of the rest of the team, that type of thing. But they're actively working all through the Houston and surrounding areas, going into homes, cleaning them out. It's just, they do a phenomenal job. Every time there's a natural disaster, you can always find them there. And it's one of the best organizations that I feel is out there for stuff like that. And I'd prefer to donate to something like that over a Red Cross or any kind of aid organization, because those organizations are important, don't get me wrong, and they do provide assistance, but Team Rubicon provides hands on deck. That's really one of the big things that I like about them and their organization. I've been a member for a long time. Things have always come up to not allow me to deploy to lend a hand, but I feel terrible about it. It's also tough running a business and getting down there because they require a week to 2 week commitment when you volunteer for stuff like that. And I don't want to turn this into my spiel, but I want to say that we are going to launch these today, and all the proceeds, everything we raise from these patches are going to go directly to Team Rubicon to help with everything that's going on right now with natural disasters around the world. Okay, so next on Gear Tasting, what I wanted to talk about is a recent shoot that I went on in Louisiana with a friend of mine. And there was an extreme long range group that did kind of a shooting event out there. There was a competition and there was also kind of a fun shoot. But the ability came up to be able to shoot out to a mile. There's not a lot of opportunities, some of you aren't even around ranges that you can even shoot 1,000 yards at, but it really stinks to find an opportunity locally, at least in my opinion, even in the great state of Texas, to shoot out to a mile. So that's a tough thing to do. And I made a mile shot this last weekend on September 23rd. I'm pretty proud of it. It was a big goal of mine, was to be able to get a 6.5 Creedmoor round out to a mile. So what I wanted to talk about is a little bit of the equipment that allowed me to do that kind of thing, what I used personally, and that's not to say that this is the way to do it for everybody, but this is my experience with the way that I've learned precision rifle and how I was able to make this kind of shot. So first off, I want to say that fundamentals, outweigh anything. So any of the gear or any of the equipment I'm going to talk about today, there's nothing more important to make a shot like that than fundamentals, because if you're not solid on the platform and you make a movement or anything like that when you're shooting, that little quarter inch at 100 yards that you may be off the target, I mean, just think of that at a mile. It's magnified extremely. So it's very tough to not really focus on the fact that fundamentals are key. So, and I owe a lot of credit to Jacob Bynum at Rifles Only for the Precision Rifle 1 and 2 class that I did there that really gave me a strong fundamental base for my shooting and precision rifles. So thank you, Jacob, for that, and I can't not mention that. Phenomenal organization. If you're considering training in precision rifle, I would highly recommend Rifles Only for anything out there. Just can't say enough good things about the organization, and if you can get down to their training facility in Texas, it's phenomenal. It's kind of near the San Antonio area. So I wanted to talk about ammo. I want to talk about glass and optics and things like that, and I purposely don't have my gun here to talk about because I've kind of gone over and over the firearm platform as a whole, and while it's very important and it had a very large role when it came to being able to make that, obviously, there's some kind of things that don't get talked about often enough, and that's kind of what I want to hit with this segment too. So first off, I want to talk about the round. This Hornady ammunition is what I use. This is 140 grain ELD match ammo, and they just recently changed the packaging, so it looks like this now. It used to be in this brown box, and I will gripe just a little bit about at Hornady, but I don't know what it is, but I can never open these boxes. It's like to save my life. You can see like all the little finger marks and just how chewed up these boxes are. I don't know. Maybe it's a personal problem. I don't know. But even on the new box, I found that I don't know. It's just tough to open. I don't know why they did that. But anyway, 20 rounds to a box, 140 grain. If you watch the Gear Tasting Radio episode that we just did, I talked a little bit about this mile shoot too in there, and I incorrectly talked about my velocity on the gun. So it's really shooting 2710, so 2,710 feet per second, rather than, I think I mentioned something like 23, which is obviously a miscalculation on my part. But the boxes of ammo, I did want to mention this. I did notice that some of the numbers have changed just a little bit. When you get out to like 300, 400, and 500 yards, their stated elevation changes at those kind of went up. The feet per second didn't change when they went to new boxes, but I don't know how they really get those calculations when it comes to the ammo. There's nothing else that changed on here. It's still 2710 feet per second, and obviously you want to run a chronograph to make sure what your gun's actually shooting at too. But those kind of calculations are all what goes into something like a Kestrel. So if you're familiar with a Kestrel, what these are doing is they're taking environmental data and they're putting that into a calculation for what you need to dial on your elevation. So in a traditional precision rifle environment, you are not dialing wind at all. You're holding for wind. So meaning instead of like dialing, I need to go 1 mil to the left for compensating for wind, you wouldn't dial that necessarily on your windage knob. You would actually hold over in the reticle on your scope, if that makes sense to everybody. So those kind of numbers, like what your gun is shooting feet per second wise, how tall the rings on your scope are, there's all kinds of variables that go into those calculations that the Kestrel is holding for you. So this is a model with the applied ballistics software on it. So what this gives you is it not only allows you to track the atmospherics that are going on, but it gives you a ballistic calculation based on what the atmosphere and environment is doing around you. So basically what I mean is from the time the bullet leaves the gun to downrange, everything has an impact on that. So obviously your fundamentals matter, so how you pull the trigger and everything like that, but the density altitude is a calculation that's really big kind of in the precision rifle environment, which is contrived through some other calculations, but that number is calculated in here and it's applied to that. So basically, it's kind of a plug and play almost. Once you put the gun or the firearm information into the platform, as well as the kind of ammo you're shooting and everything like that, it's spitting out the actual ballistic calculation. So that's kind of what I do with what I write down. So I'm using I'm using environmental data, so you're basically gathering that from the Kestrel. You can use this, you can get an idea of what the wind's doing, but again, if you think about what wind's doing, there's a bunch of different places where the wind impacts your bullet at. There's downrange, meaning where it's actually hitting the target. There's at the gun where you're at, that you're actually able to get the wind data at. So wind is not a precise science. It's always kind of an educated guess, so to speak. The more you learn about reading the wind, the more educated a guess you can have with that. So you see the big wind dial on the Kestrel. That's not the only purpose of this. It's gathering other things with this other little sensor. So like humidity and other things that are going on in the environment are gathered by this. But once you have those locked in, that's when you can kind of use the range card that's built into this or the calculation to actually get your elevation data or your dope on what you would actually dial to shoot. So I found that with everything I've been able to put into the Kestrel from this particular 6.5 Creedmoor that I built, it's been almost spot on. So there was a little bit of calculation difference when I got out to the longer yardage. So I had some changes when I got out to like 1,400 yards, and then again at 1,760 with my mile. So it was about a 2 mil holdover on 1,400 yards, and then that was the target. And then I moved out to steel at 1,760, and it was a 3.5 mil holdover. So meaning I actually ran out of elevation adjustment when I got out to that distance. So the elevation only dialed to 20 mils. So that's 4 revolutions with the scope I have. That's the Night Force SHV 4-14 F1 is the scope that I'm using. And it's only like a $1,200 scope, so I feel like that's really good performance out of that piece of glass that I was able to reach out to a mile. So Kestrel is important, and I'm getting data and dope that's in here, and that's what I'm writing down on kind of my physical range card. So what I like to do is draw out, and this may be hard to see, so I apologize, but I like to draw out the targets and the shapes of the targets at different yardage if I'm able to gather that data. In some matches, you may not even know the target you're shooting at until you get to the stage and you're actually shooting it, but this event was, I don't want to say easy per se, but we got a chance to range targets and know the distances before we actually shot the course of fire, which is sometimes rare when you're shooting precision rifle stuff. So, and that was handled through the SIG rangefinder that I have. So this is the Kilo 2000. I think this is, they upgraded. Yeah, so this is the 2200 MR is the SIG Kilo that I have now. So I like this because you're able to just press the range finding button down and then scan targets. So it's automatically feeding the data into that. So you're able to gather that information. And again, through atmospheric data, through dope, through range, you're able to get that calculation of what you need to dial to. Because obviously the other piece of the data that Kestrel's not going to tell you is what range you're shooting at. So, that's kind of the deal too. So, and then a spotting scope was important too because, my shooting partner and I were shooting together. So it was important that one of us spot either through the spotter's scope. That's always a great thing to use. But if you have a dedicated spotting scope that's on a tripod, sometimes that can be a more stable platform to see, to look at what the splash is doing from the rounds. So that's the way you would make corrections as a spotter. But spotting scope is key. This is the Bushnell tactical version. This is like I've got boxes over here, Legend T-Series 15-45, 60 millimeter is what this is. And I found this to be a very good spotting scope, and it was perfectly capable of seeing stuff out to a mile. So we also were running another spotting scope that my shooting partner had. It's Miopta, I think is the name of the brand, but it was like $1,800 spotting scope, and that's way more than I'm willing to spend on a spotting scope. But he had one, and I felt that it was a really good piece of glass, and I was able to see a lot too. But it wasn't. I would say it's not $1,200 better than this is, because this roughly runs $400 to $500 if I remember correctly. But $1,800 versus $400 to $500, and I could still pretty much see stuff fairly well at a mile. So take with that what you will. But again, so when I was shooting out to a mile, what my elevation wound up being was 23.5 mils was my elevation. You know, again, it was just really cool to be able to shoot that. And you know, I also carry around a little manual calculator. That's something else that I might not have talked about. Sometimes I use my iPhone for that type of thing because sometimes you do have to do some math. And as you know, I'm not so good at math, not my best subject. I'd rather history or English or something like that. But anyway, the other thing that shooting with my buddy that I shot with out at this event, I ran into the problem that I've talked about here on Gear Tasting before, which is he's shooting MOA, I'm shooting mil. So it's tough for me to make calls to him on adjustments. So we actually created this little mil or MOA to mil conversion card. So I laminated these, and it's got a conversion that's easy to reference. So if we need to make calls like that for the MOA mil conversion, we can do that by quickly referencing this card. So that was something that we kind of came up with as a way to compensate for that issue that we might run into. So hopefully that provides a little insight into some of the lesser known equipment that is required to make a mile shot. And let us know if you have any questions. If you want to hear about detail on anything specifically that we used to make the mile shot, let us know. Welcome to Questions Over Coffee. Today I'm going to field a question from Jacob, and he has a question about signal panels. But first, I am drinking Avoca coffee today. This is a local Fort Worth roaster that we buy from. It's called Tengu. It's a very good coffee. Highly recommend it. They're now doing online ordering too. So if you're interested in getting this and you're not local to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can now pick it up. And they roast everything locally. They're a great source of coffee if you would like to try something different. Highly recommend Avoca. So Jacob F. from Facebook asks, would you be willing to do a walkthrough for using VS17 signal panels and your smaller signal panels? Yes, absolutely. So the origin of VS17 panels are a military designation, and this is what a standard military VS17 panel looks like. It's fairly bulky. It's got this paracord attached to it. You've got kind of a pocket that it all kind of folds up into, and it looks about like that when it's folded up. So this is a brand new one that hasn't even been opened. So the way that these are made is they're actually pretty damn big. So when you look at these as a whole, you know, to use them as a signal panel, they're more of a recognition panel, you know. So if you think about them that way, they're used to kind of either identify friend or foe. So maybe that's the way that they're used. They could be put onto a vehicle to kind of say, hey, our signal today is magenta. When you see a vehicle with a magenta panel on it, then they're the good guys, you know, that type of IFF identification. But then they can also be used to signal with too. And primarily when you're talking about a signaling panel, there's some standard signals that are used in emergency situations. So if you're at sea and you're lost or something like that, and you have the ability to have a signal panel with you, you can configure it into different folded techniques to mean different things. So basically they're aerial recognition signals at that point. And to do that, you do kind of need a larger signal panel. So you're fairly limited when you get to a smaller VS17. So the premise behind the Battle Systems MPIL, which is what I'll talk about in a second, that's the product that we sell, is that a lot of guys will cut down a VS17 to something like this. So this is basically, you know, the large full-size signal panel, and this is a cut down one that can be stored pretty small in a kit. Obviously, it's still fairly big, but when you're talking about a VS17, it can be a lot, you know, easier to carry than something like that. But a company called Battle Systems that we work with came up with a small signal panel that is basically easy to use. It's super lightweight. This is the size of it, so it's very small and compact. You saw what it folds down to. It can get down pretty damn small, and the ability to carry that is a lot less of a burden than even a cut down VS17 can be. So the premise behind that is it's still got the orange side and it's still got the magenta side. This is a project that we did with Battle Systems a while back. We made some visor signal panels. So these were basically one wrap strips that got wrapped around your visor, and then you could dock on these other strips. So we had this one, and then we had kind of a black backer and then a United States flag on the other that was screen printed. So that's a product that's kind of since been discontinued. I don't know, we could bring it back at some time in the future, but for now, that's how it exists, kind of as an older project that we've done. But so the premise for the VS17s is that you can signal with them, and I'm going to use an older variation of these. They've kind of upgraded the magentas. I don't know if you can really see, it might be washed out in the camera, but they've gone to a more magenta or violet color that more closely resembles the VS17 rather than what they were using before. There's still a difference in the colors between what they were using before, but now they've gone to a kind of a more magenta color that I like better. But so the premise is that if you need medical help and you are not able to actually communicate with anybody, this is kind of the universal medical signal. So you can fold this into a medical cross by folding up each one of the corners, and that's kind of your signal for that. You can also kind of fold universally. You can fold something that looks like this, that resembles more of an arrow in a pointed direction. And this would be, kind of a, safe to land. Here's where we recommend landing, that type of thing. There's a bunch of variations on this stuff, and there are some commonly used signals that are important to know, but they can be tough to memorize too. I've always remembered the medical one. The other thing you can do with the medical one too is fold like a 3/4 medical symbol. So what this means is that you need medical supplies. So if you leave a corner out like that, that can mean, hey, send medical supplies. But that's kind of the essence of what you can do with the VS17 panel. There's a bunch of different configurations you can use to put it into, as well as different ways to carry it with kind of the commercially available options for VS17 panels now. Or you can find the military issue ones still on eBay. They're fairly inexpensive to buy too, but they're just bulky, so kind of know that going into it. Hey guys, thanks for watching Gear Tasting. Remember, as always, you can use the pound tag Gear Tasting on any social media network if you've got questions, and we'll Ansel Adams. We'll answer them here on Gear Tasting in the Questions Over Coffee segment. And if you like what we're doing here on Gear Tasting, please consider checking out patreon.com/ITSTactical and check out some of the perks we have for supporting the show through Patreon. Thanks for watching.